Right. So today we're going to get our hands a little dirty.
Okay.
We are diving into Martha Stewart's gardening handbook,
All right.
and we're going to be using um, a recent review from your name as kind of our guide through the book.
Sounds good.
And really, the goal of this deep dive is to give you sort of the shortcut to the juiciest bits, whether you are a seasoned gardener
Right.
or just starting to think about maybe that first window box.
And I think what's great about this review is that it is super thorough. It covers like soup to nuts, like how to design the garden, pick the right plants, actually get them in the ground, keep them happy, and even what to do with all that gorgeous produce.
I was really impressed by that. It really did cover
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And the first thing that really jumped out at me was how Martha emphasizes design. Like, before you even think about buying a tomato plant, you need a plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's about really looking at your space, you know, the sunlight, you get the soil conditions, and then picturing what you want to create.
Right.
You know, are you going for a formal look with perfectly trimmed hedges? Or maybe a whimsical cottage garden that's overflowing with blooms?
Whimsical cottage garden, that sounds right up my alley.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much the perfectly trimmed hedge.
Yeah. And Martha even talks about edible landscapes, which is really cool. It's where you're blending herbs and veggies and flowers
Oh, wow.
to make your whole yard both beautiful and delicious.
Oh, edible landscape. I like the sound of that. But then there's the whole issue of choosing plants.
Yeah.
You walk into a garden center, and it's so overwhelming.
Right. But the review highlights how Martha breaks it down and makes it easy.
Okay.
The book has these really detailed profiles for tons of different plants, helping you figure out what will actually thrive in your specific climate and your conditions.
Okay.
Plus, there's this really fun section called Martha's Picks, which is like getting, personal recommendations from the queen bee herself.
Okay, so I've got my plan. I've picked out my plants. How do I actually get them in the ground? I'm more of a black thumb kind of person.
Well, according to the review, Martha's got you covered.
Okay.
The book walks you through all the different planting techniques with clear steps and even illustrations, which is great for visual learners.
I love a good illustration.
Yeah, me too. And for example, she demystifies building raised beds.
Okay.
So whether you're working with wood or brick or even repurposed materials, she lays out the process in a way that makes it feel totally doable.
So it's not just about planting seeds. It's about building the whole structure.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And what about composting? That always seems super complicated to me.
You know, I used to think so too, but the review says Martha makes it surprisingly approachable.
Okay.
She explains the benefits like enriching your soil and reducing waste, and then gives you clear instructions. She even breaks down different composting methods so you can find what works best for you.
Right. So my garden is designed. My plants are in the ground. I'm composting like a pro. But what about the actual care? I feel like that's where I always go wrong.
Yeah.
Watering, weeding, like figuring out what bugs are eating your zucchini. It's a lot.
It can be really overwhelming.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the gardening handbook really takes all the guesswork out of it.
Okay.
You know, covers everything from watering techniques, like how to even tell if you're overwatering or underwatering,
Oh,
to pest control.
okay.
And Martha's a huge proponent of natural solutions, which I think you'll appreciate.
Oh, for sure. I am all about keeping things eco-friendly.
Yeah.
What kind of natural pest control tips does she offer?
Well, for example, the review mentions attracting beneficial insects to your garden.
Okay.
So instead of reaching for like the chemical pesticides, you're actually inviting ladybugs and lacewings to do the work for you.
Oh.
They feast on those pesky aphids and keep your plants healthy naturally.
Oh, that's really cool. It's like you're creating your own little ecosystem.
Exactly. And speaking of ecosystems, Martha's a huge proponent of composting too.
Yeah.
Which we touched on earlier.
Right.
Not only does it reduce waste, but it also creates this incredibly rich, nutrient-packed soil that your plants will just absolutely thrive in.
Okay. I'm sold on the composting thing. But let's be honest. All this work is really about enjoying the harvest.
Absolutely.
Right. So what kind of tips does Martha give for making the most of our homegrown goodies?
You know, it's so funny. So many gardening books really focus on like the growing part.
Right.
But this one actually dedicates a whole section to harvesting and enjoying,
yeah.
which is great. The review mentions her tips for harvesting at peak ripeness.
Okay.
So you're getting the absolute most flavor and nutritional value from your fruits and veggies.
That makes sense because I've definitely had some tomatoes that I've grown that tasted kind of bland, and maybe it's because I picked them too early.
Exactly.
So what else does she cover in that harvesting section?
Well, it's not just about picking the produce at the right time.
Right.
It's about really like using it in creative and delicious ways.
Okay.
The review mentions recipes for homemade jams and jellies, tips for creating like stunning floral arrangements
Wow.
with your homegrown blooms, and even instructions for brewing your own herbal teas.
Martha really does think of everything.
She does.
You know, before we wrap up, I did want to touch on the presentation of the book itself because the review mentioned how visually stunning it is.
It is. The reviewer actually used the phrase feast for the eyes
Oh,
to describe it. It's packed with hundreds of these gorgeous, full-color photos that really bring the gardens to life.
wow.
Apparently, even the paper quality is top-notch. It's like a coffee table book almost.
It's a beautiful and practical.
Yeah,
Sounds like Martha's found like the perfect recipe for a gardening handbook.
she really has.
But before we go, I'm curious to get your overall takeaway. What's the one big thing that stuck with you from this review?
Honestly, I think it's the way that Martha really blends beauty, practicality, and inspiration.
Yeah.
She takes something that can feel intimidating, like gardening,
Right.
and breaks it down into these like really manageable steps while emphasizing the joy and the creativity that comes with it.
Yeah,
And I think that's something that any gardener at any level can appreciate.
I totally agree. And before we send our listeners out into their own gardens,
Yeah.
what's one specific piece of advice that you think they could implement right away, even if they don't have the book in hand?
That's a great question. I think if there's one thing to take away from this deep dive, it's the idea of intentionality.
Okay.
You know, before you plant anything, before you even buy a single seed packet, take some time to really envision what you want to create in your garden.
Okay.
What are your goals? What kind of feeling do you want to evoke?
Yeah.
Once you have that vision in mind, the rest will really just fall into place.
So it's about taking that pause, thinking things through, and really approaching your garden with a plan.
Exactly.
I love that. It's like garden with intention.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It's like gardening with intention. So, instead of just randomly sticking plants on the ground, we're really creating this space that reflects our vision and brings us joy.
Exactly. And honestly, I think that mindset shift can make all the difference, whether you're a seasoned gardener or, just starting out.
And, it makes me think about how we approach other areas of our lives, too.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we could all use a little more of that Martha Stewart intentionality, not just in our gardens, but, in our homes, in our work, in our relationships.
That's a really good point. It's
Yeah.
about bringing that same level of thoughtfulness and care to everything we do.
Absolutely. But for now, let's keep our focus on those gardens.
Okay.
What is one final thought that you would leave our listeners with, something to really inspire them to get out there and get their hands dirty?
Let me see. Imagine you're hosting a garden party,
Okay.
and Martha Stewart herself is on the guest list.
Oh, my gosh.
How would you design your garden? What would you plant to impress her?
Right.
What little details would you add to make it truly special?
Oh, that's a fun challenge. I'm already picturing like rows of perfectly spaced heirloom tomatoes, fragrant herbs spilling out of terracotta pots, and maybe even a whimsical little gnome tucked away amongst the flowers.
I love it. It really doesn't matter if Martha Stewart ever actually sets foot in your garden.
Right.
The point is to create a space that brings you joy,
Yeah.
a space that reflects your personality and nourishes your soul. And who knows, maybe you'll even inspire your friends and neighbors to up their gardening game too.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something? A whole neighborhood blooming with creativity and intentionality, all thanks to a little nudge from Martha and this deep dive.
That's the dream.
So to all of our listeners out there, we say, get out there, get inspired, and happy gardening.